so we're going through Mark, and Gloria's like, again? Yes, again, Gloria. Yeah. Because Gloria came to this stuff all through the pandemic too. And like we did it through them. And actually that one we did with the pandemic that was just small. It was basically Gloria and I think occasionally Lee and Ed and Joanne and all of them. Like, they would all kind of show up. And that was kind of the impetus for that sermon series. I was like, oh, like that's kind of, I was seeing some stuff that I hadn't really seen before. And then after doing even more study, and we can have more people in this one now, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do again. And then we'll figure out what to do. And this, we're kind of doing a hybrid of what we used to do pre-pandemic. So we listen to the scriptures, but we don't listen to 45 minutes of it. It's shorter stenches. And so that seems to be working pretty good. Okay. So we are in chapter 6 and we just finished going through chapter 5, which is the demon possessed man. And before that is all the soil stuff. And we saw a lamp on a stand and how Jesus, the kingdom of God, it comes like a mustard seed. And it also comes like that one quote that I really enjoy is, a man scatters seed on the ground night and day, whether he sleeps or he gets up, the seed sprouts and grows. He does not know how. And so that sense of like, we don't know how this stuff works every time. And then we get all these stories that I really view as God turning bad soil into good. But we really kind of went through some interesting things. I can't remember exactly all that we said last week, but there were some interesting things that were said pertaining to like what was going on with the synagogue leader's daughter, and we see in that, and kind of the end of that story, we see in verse 42 of chapter 5 that immediately the girls stood up and began to walk around. At this, they were completely astonished, and he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. That idea of astonishment was something that we kind of used for the Easter sermon. And so we have that. And I think chapter 6, the beginning of chapter 6, the prophet without honor section is kind of a continuation of this idea. And so we'll kind of get into it. So what we'll do is we'll read chapter 6, 1 through 13. And then kind of talk about it, because this is a very fun chapter coming up for it. We'll see how far we get, because there's a lot of fun stuff being talked about. Okay, so let's do the Bible stuff here. So we'll screenshot. Let's see, we got it optimized for video, and then we hit that button. And you guys let me know if you can't hear anything. So here's Mark chapter 6, verse 1.
Then he went out from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished.
Where did this man get these things?
And what wisdom is this which is given to him, that such mighty works are performed by his hands?
Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?
So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them,
A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country, among his own relatives, and in his own house.
Now he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. Then he went about the villages in a circuit, teaching. And he called the 12 to himself, and began to send them out 2 by 2, and gave them power over unclean spirits. He commanded them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bag, no bread, no copper in their money belts, but to wear sandals, and not to put on 2 tunics.
In whatever place you enter a house, stay there till you depart from that place. And whoever will not receive you, nor hear you, when you depart from there, shake off the dust under your feet as a testimony against them. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city.
So they went out and preached that people should repent. And they cast out many demons, and anointed with oil many who were sick, and healed them.
All right. Okay, so let's see. I gotta remember how to do all this now. Okay. All right. So in that section, so before we actually talk about what we think, I want to ask this one question first. The transition from chapter 5 into chapter 6, do you think that's a hard transition or a soft one? Is it starting a completely new idea, or is it just a transitional idea, or is it connected to the previous stuff? What do you think? Or what do you think? There's no.
Take a poll.
Couldn't there have been distance, maybe days or weeks between those two events?
Yeah. Like it's so one of the things I see in Mark is that he's always like moving. And so, and I think he thematically strings stories of what Jesus did together to tell an overarching narrative. And one of the things that I've been asking these people here to look for is in those transitions, do you think it's, even if there was time present, is the theme going from this previous section into here, or is he starting a new idea? Is it lightly connected? Is it, what do you think? Like, and so I was calling it like a hard transition or a soft transition. Like a hard one is one that's like, okay, yeah, we're kind of done with that past theme. We're moving on to something new. And so, and I don't know, I'm just getting people's opinion about this one, because a lot of this stuff from before, we were kind of throwing in the soft transitions, like, yeah, like it keeps on saying it. But yeah, so what do you guys think? So Lori was saying that there's time involved, and so you're saying there's probably a little bit more of a hard.
It seems like a new subject. The only thing I wondered about, now he sent the disciples out.
Yeah.
Now, where was the Holy Spirit in that? They say we don't get the Holy Spirit until Acts. So how did they do all those miracles? And all that in that part that bothered me. how that worked.
So we'll talk about that here in a second. So if we don't talk about that, like remind me. Like we'll come back to it. So like that's what. So what else? What else do you guys think?
It's a hard transition.
I see the connection of him referencing home, because they brought the afflicted person and lowered him down.
Yeah.
And then he went to this other person's home. And then in this chapter 6, there is a reference about prophet is not without honor except in his own country home.
Yeah.
His country is a small area.
Yeah.
And so there's maybe this prejudice because of association and familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a soft transition.
Okay, so you think it's kind of combining in with that previous idea?
Yeah.
All right, Lee, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I think it's a hard transition.
Yeah.
Because we kept coming up with the word amazement, and people were amazed and astounded by everything he was doing. And suddenly we got to, who's this guy?
Okay.
His hometown.
Yeah, it's a complete, So this kid, this is Joe's kid. What do you mean, he's a miracle worker?
I feel like I'm looking at it through different glasses.
What, Ed?
It looks to me like the theme in 5 and before were mostly to do with miracles.
Yeah.
Now he's talking about teaching. It's like it's mostly to do with sending out the disciples to teach, not as much with the miracles that he's just done as far as walking on water and running out all the other stuff.
All right, cool. Did anyone else have anything?
I had one other thing.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little soft because everything that came previously was because of the people's faith.
Yeah.
And here he's showing, what happens if you don't have faith, because they had no faith, and he was amazed at how little faith they had.
Yeah. Yeah. So we see all these people that have a lot of faith. And then you're saying that's an interesting perspective. Then all of a sudden these people have no faith. And what's a consequence because they have no faith?
He can't do the miracles.
They can't do that. He can't do the miracles.
Right.
That's an interesting that's an interesting nugget there. That they don't have the faith and they can't do the miracles. There's other parts in other gospels. We have the Lord's Prayer that we all know. It's that one kind of suggests the same thing. Forgive us our sins just as we forgive others. That it's even in our Lord's Prayer, which we say every week around here, and pretty much any Christian knows, at least passively, like that. And that thing seems to be saying that forgiveness is a two-way street, and that forgiving, if you would like to get forgiveness, it means being a forgiving person as well, and it's almost like that same idea is being said here of the miracles, which is very interesting. Now let's go into the world of theme. Okay. Let's go into the world of theme here. We are getting into where Jesus is sending out the 12. Then we're getting into the story about the beheading of John the Baptist. Now we're going to get into that, but one of the key ideas in that story is that it's out of place. It happened at a different time than this. We're going back. So Mark is weaving a tale, and he's not just going, well, and this happened August 14th, year 3, something like that. He's weaving a tale, and that story is in here. So you're thinking about the king of Israel, type of ideas going out there. So if you think about king of Israel stuff and disciples being sent out and saying to wipe their feet off on the ground, and Jesus being rejected in his hometown, what do you think maybe is a bigger theme that is going on? It's starting to be established. Am I being too cryptic? Because I could just start talking. Like this.
Are you talking about your theme of power? I mean, is that what you're?
I think it's some of it. I think this may be alluding, because we start seeing it in the temple stuff again, when Jesus goes in to the temple and clears it out and preaches in the temple and all that. We start seeing like a culmination of it. But is this kind of a veiled reference that, because it's kind of a common thing in the Old Testament that no prophet gets honor in his hometown, right?
Familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah, contempt.
That was my point that I was trying to make when I spoke up.
Is Israel kind of a reference to the hometown? That Israel proper, that they have missed the boat completely, on the prophets and all of that stuff. Because you think Jesus sends out the 12, which sounds a lot like the prophets going sent out, and that I think Jesus even says in Mark chapter 13, it is like it wouldn't be proper for a prophet to die outside the walls of Jerusalem, like or something like that, like being super sarcastic there, like that. That's and so like it's just like when I was listening to it here, I wrote down Israel in there, that it may be kind of alluding to this bigger idea. So they're rejecting Jesus, and I think this is an interesting transition, because I think it's a bit on the hard side, but it's definitely taking themes from everything we just read about all these people having faith. And yet now here's a group of people that are refusing, and there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And we're going to get into this story that ends up kind of looking like maybe a story that looks like Israel proper, and it's almost like a parable, a living parable of Israel proper now coming forward than just like, oh, well, this is what Jesus did on this day. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Now, this study Bible makes an interesting point that Jesus was referred to as the son of Mary, not Joseph.
Okay.
That it was like an insult.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting.
Brothers, James and Joseph and Judas and Simon in one sentence.
So think that's interesting writing there. I hadn't noticed that. But think about what we know about how Mark writes and the power stuff that we were talking about and what's important. So they are trying to insult him with the son of Mary, but we saw that they also tried to insult him with the crucifixion. But Mark's entire thing is that all that low stuff, all the mustard seeds and all that low stuff is actually where the power is. And that's I didn't notice that. That's a good catch that they're trying to.
Thank the listener.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting thing that it's that they're even like trying to denigrate him. They're not even using his father,
I also feel that the big picture that Mark, to me, paints all the way throughout is the purpose of why God sent Jesus.
Yeah.
And how he's weaving through the miracles and his relationship with others and his humbleness and all of that.
Yeah.
In this particular part, where he's really focusing on, they don't believe here.
Yeah.
Some of them need waking up or something.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, why are we hearing this here, and what is God's purpose for this whole scenario?
And also, if you look at it, they get angry at him, much like the villagers of the guy who had cast out demons got angry at him too.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if it's kind of for some of the same reasons, that there's a way of life that has been formed in this way, and Jesus is kind of pushing up against that. Yeah.
And still they didn't believe, even though he did cure a few sick people.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting to me how this affects Jesus and his performance.
Yeah.
How people that you must believe are closest to him, that he's interacted with most of his life, are having that kind of effect on him.
Yeah.
And so therefore, as an alternative, he sends out the disciples.
Yeah. So we'll get into the disciples now. And so they went around teaching from village to village, and he called the 12 to him and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. So I think that's part of it right there, that authority.
Right.
One of the things that when did I start really realizing? I think it's probably around the end of seminary. I started realizing that like, let's read the Gospels independently from one another. Yes, we can reference them, but I grew up in a church that it seemed like its entire goal was to make this one solid, cohesive story of Jesus by taking all 4 of the Gospels. But when you do that, you create a story that wasn't ever written. So like the nativity, I make a kind of a big deal out of this every year for Christmas. The nativity isn't written down anywhere like that. That's because it's combining things from Luke and Matthew. And so in making a story that was never really in the scriptures. And that's fine. It's cute. It's telling the story. Like there's nothing wrong with it. But one of the things that is helpful to remember is Luke and Acts are intricately connected. Luke and Acts are intricately connected. And so if you allow Acts to kind of fall away from the wayside a little bit, then you may see the Spirit being used in a little bit different manner. That's how I answer that question. I don't think it's a good answer, but I do think you see here that he says that he gave him authority in that moment.
It does say that.
And this is also connected to later on in the story that we're going to get to where the disciples aren't able to cast out that one demon out of that person. And that is completely talking about that sense of power that we're talking about there. So when you look at the disciples and what Jesus tells them, he's like, take your staff, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts, wear sandals, but no extra shirt. And wherever you stay there, if they don't welcome you, wipe the dust off your feet. Does that sound familiar? Is that what sounds oddly familiar there?
From dust you shall return.
From dust you shall return. Okay. Yeah. What else kind of like that? Does that sound familiar to anyone? Like or is it just like, oh, this is just what he had them do? Think about Israel again.
The wilderness?
Like it kind of sounds wildernessy to me. Like that's like Passover going into the wilderness where they just have nothing, right? And so in that maybe that may be taking that too far, but if you see that Israel isn't part of this, and then now Jesus is sending them on this journey kind of through the wilderness again. Now it's going from house to house, but they're having to completely rely on the gifts of others, the gifts of like what manna would be, where they can't take anything with them. And then like the shaking the dust off your feet. Let's see, do I have, I have a study note in this Bible about shaking the dust off your feet. Jews entering Israel from Gentile territory shook the dust off their feet, a symbolic gesture of entering a sacred space. In the present case, this is an act of prophetic judgment on the part of Jesus' disciples, perhaps equating to unwelcoming cities with Gentile lands. So that's kind of what's going on there. So yeah.
I also have something. It says, given Jesus's redefinition of Israel and family around him, which he has done in the previous chapters, this symbolizes that the village, in refusing to offer hospitality to Jesus' disciples, has chosen to remain outside of God's offer of salvation.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So kind of
comes in there.
Yeah. So like that idea of and getting back into the Lord's Prayer again, that's like, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth just as it is in heaven. That they are kind of like, well, we don't want your will or kingdom, like that's and so that kind of things. That's a good thing too. And so we're kind of seeing that with the disciples being sent out, and also with the family in the hometown. So
I've had to weigh very heavily on him.
Yeah, I would say so. So, all right, you guys ready to go on? So let's do the John the Baptist beheaded here. We'll do 14 through 29. 14 through 29. And here we go.
Now King Herod heard of him, for his name had become well known.
John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him.
Others said,
It is Elijah.
It is the prophet, or like one of the prophets.
But when Herod heard, he said,
This is John, whom I beheaded. He has been raised from the dead.
For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John, and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her, because John had said to Herod,
It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife.
Therefore Herodias held it against him, and wanted to kill him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and holy man, and he protected him. And when he heard him, he did many things, and heard him gladly. Then an opportune day came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced, and pleased Herod and those who sat with him,
Ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you. Whatever you ask me, I will give you, up to half my kingdom.
So she went out and said to her mother,
What shall I ask? The head of John the Baptist.
Immediately she came in with haste to the king and asked,
I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter.
And the king was exceedingly sorry. Yet, because of the oaths, and because of those who sat with him, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately, the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. And the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard of it, they came and took away his corpse and laid it in a tomb.
Okay. Okay, so what do you think is interesting about that? What's going on? What sounds familiar? What's odd? What's neat? What do you think?
Has Mark thrown this story in at this point to show the difference between Jesus as true king and Herod as a king of the world?
I think so, and I think you're going to see that more even in the next reading, like the feeding of the 5,000. I thought about reading them together, but like that's the feeding of the 5,000 definitely has some language that connects to this, and shows. And this is how I say it: that Herod is a feckless ruler. Mm-hmm. That he should. Herod, my whole thing is Herod should have all the power, but his power ended at a teenager's sexy dance, and he just doesn't have any of the power. Like that. That's where his power ended. So
and the gruesomeness of his death. It wasn't just merely stabbing him.
Yeah,
it was a gruesome death.
Yeah,
almost likened to the gruesomeness of the death of Jesus. Okay. So it was like, that they considered that this had to be an extra special type of death for John the Baptist.
And you can tell as you read it that it's out of place, it's out of order, like it's all that, because here at the beginning they're talking about Jesus, and then it goes back in time. So it's making special point, like he could have put it in the order at the beginning, but he's telling a story, and like so he goes back in time to tell this. So let's see here. So Herod heard of Jesus. All right. Because it became well known. And I think the beginning part is very interesting here. So some were saying that John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. And that is why miraculous power is at work in him, which would have scared Herod. We're about to find out why. Now, look, does this sound familiar? Others said he is Elijah, and still others claimed he is a prophet, like one of the prophets long ago.
Oh, the prophets had said Elijah was going to come back to life before Jesus or before the Messiah.
Yeah.
So that's why they probably thought, this has got to be Elijah.
Yeah. So we haven't read this in Mark yet, but that's almost verbatim for something that's going to happen in a couple chapters. Do you remember what it is off the top of your head? Remember when
that's who do you say I am?
Yeah, who do you say I am? And Peter goes, some say you're John the Baptist, others say one of the prophets, some say you're Elijah, but who do you say I am? You're the Christ. It's the same phrase. I think that, and we'll talk more about that when we get up to that phrase here in a couple chapters. I think Mark is using that to get our minds to remember who originally said that in the book here. And it's taking us back to this story about Herod and how Herod should have all the power, but he's just a feckless ruler, right? Like that's so let's see here. So did Herod like John the Baptist?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like that's what I think so interesting about Herod. He enjoyed listening. He was scared. He's scared of him. He's like, ooh, like this guy's got stuff, but like he was into it. Type of thing. He liked him and what he was saying. But
he realized he was a holy man.
Yeah, he realized he was a holy man, and but that birthday came, and he could have said no. He was king, but he would rather give up to the whims of however he was feeling when he was feeling a little pleased, that he would rather give up to the whims of there. And it shows you that he is just a feckless king.
And do you really believe that he had no idea that this was somehow premeditated?
With his wife and all that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's some things, but like he could have stood up. He could have went back on what he said.
Or not made the offer at all.
Yeah, or not made the offer at all. Had some control over himself. Yeah, like that. That's so what's the sense of Herod that you get? What's the sense of Herod?
He put his religious beliefs aside to look good.
Okay, yeah. He's doing a lot to look good. Middle of his birthday party, like lot to look good, right? So that's what
he leads from behind.
Yeah, leads from behind. Yeah. So like that's so. What other senses are you getting about Herod here?
Fickle.
Yeah, he's fickle. Yeah, fickle and all those.
Egotistical.
Yeah. Now think about where we've been. So we've been talking about all these people that we've seen all these amazing healings, and then Jesus goes into his hometown. There's no faith there, all that stuff, and then he sends out the 12, and they're doing their whole thing out there, and now we have this big fickle king. All right, so let's now connect that story with Jesus feeding the 5,000.
Can I just mention?
Yeah, you can say something.
It's shown in the study Bible at the very end of in 29. It says when his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb.
Yeah,
which meant they found out about it in time to do it before somebody else did anything with his body.
Yeah,
and this says Jesus got some of his original disciples from John the Baptist That's it from John chapter 1. And after John's execution, even more of them joined up with Jesus. But in Acts chapter 19, it makes it clear that some of John's disciples never got word about Jesus. 2 decades after John's death, Paul stumbles across a group of loyal followers in Ephesus, hundreds of miles away.
Yeah. So
that I do not know.
And this,
Like,
this one says that the disciples came and took his body and put it in a tomb, which they failed to do. Jesus died.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good point too.
Yeah.
I like that.
So that's yeah. So that's a good point. So you're seeing there's a lot of little storytelling going on. Yeah, a lot of little stuff. All right, so let's read Jesus feeds the 5,000. This will be verse 30 through 44, and it's also connected to the next story, but we're going to talk about feeding the 5,000 first. And let's see here. Here we go.
Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught.
Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while.
For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him.
This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat.
You give them something to eat.
Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?
How many loaves do you have? Go and see.
And when they found out, they said,
5 and 2 fish.
Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men.
All right. Okay. So, well, let me get back onto there. Got to remember to do my job here. So what did we what do you notice about all this? What are some key takeaways, or you just want me to go through it?
They were like sheep without a shepherd.
Yeah, that's a big one. That one's real big. So so they're like sheep without a shepherd. Why is Jesus saying that they look like they're sheep without a shepherd?
People were following people and not realizing what the other people were following because of.
Okay.
One of the things I'm thinking.
So what does it say right before that in verse 34? Like it says that he was moved with compassion.
Yeah.
Because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Now where are they? Where are they?
That's what I wanted to know.
They're on the land. He's in a boat.
Well, yeah. Well, where does it say? That's verse 32. It's verse 32. like the desert, deserted place. Like that. So that's
not a desert, but a deserted place.
So
they're sitting on grass.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they're in this like they're just they're out in the country and stuff like that. But it's using purposeful words here. When you hear desert and deserted place, what do you think of? And when you put on your biblical glasses,
Exodus.
You think about the Exodus and all that stuff. Like there's oftentimes holy stuff is happening in desert and deserted places.
Wilderness.
Yeah, wilderness wanderings and all that stuff. Like that's
And it is without oversight.
Oversight, yeah.
It is without boundaries.
So yeah. So you have so we just got done talking about with Herod and how he should have all the power, but there's no power there. And you go into this next story, and Jesus goes out to kind of go out to the desert place, and everyone follows him out there to this deserted place. Everyone follows out there, and he looks at everyone. He has compassion on them because they're like sheep without a shepherd. What do you think that means?
No Herod.
There's no king. Well, Herod is more interested in giving away half of his kingdom because of a sexy dance than actually being king.
Mm-hmm.
That he's power. So Jesus is saying, and because shepherd, remember, David was a shepherd. Shepherd is kingly Messiah language in the Old Testament. Like that's over there. It started coming in differently later on as we get into the New Testament, kind of for smaller groups. But then it's like you look at all the prophets. It's like all you people, you did a bad job of shepherding the people here. And he's talking about the big religious leaders. He's talking about all the people that ran things. And so it's like they're like sheep without a shepherd. And suddenly we see that story. Maybe we're starting to see why that story was about Herod where it is. We're seeing that Herod is worthless, and that these people are just coming out there because the leadership there was worthless. They're like sheep without a shepherd. And they come in this deserted place and they're teaching them and all that stuff. And the disciples are like, sure is getting late. Like these people need to go home. These people need to go home. And he's like, tell them to go home, Jesus. And he's like, you give them something to eat. Because they come up with like a sorry excuse. Like they need to eat, like they need to eat. And he's like, you give them something to eat. What? Like you want us to spend that amount of money?
That commercial with the
like that's
and the fridge, there's hardly anything there, but there's miracle.
Yeah. And so
well, it's really mayo, but I think of it as Miracle Whip because of the word miracle.
Yeah. Sorry. So then he's like, all right, so what do you have? And they find there's 5 loaves and 2 fish. What's important about that number?
7.
7, which is a good holy number. 7 kind of means complete, kind of all. You have 7 days of creation, all that good stuff happening. And he has them sit down and all on the ground. And he takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He blesses it. And how does it describe the people after they eat? How does it describe the people?
Filled.
Yeah, filled, satisfied, all those things. Think about the difference between sheep without a shepherd and satisfied, right? Like those are key indications of where, and this is why that sermon series is all about that power stuff, because that's just that feckless political ruler. It doesn't mean anything. And we see that Jesus here is satisfying them. And then how many basketfuls were left over?
12.
12. Another important number, the 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples. Like that's it kind of is signifying that all this is happening and in all these details here. So then let's see how much time we got. All right, we got enough time. Then we've got the next story about Jesus walking on the sea. We'll go to the end of the chapter.
Can I just add something in my Bible? It said that one of the things that they noted was that he fed the 4,000, and no one was amazed. No one was amazed, so that they're saying that not the disciples nor the people, so they didn't really understand the significance of what was happening.
Yeah. Well, and so what you're talking about there leads us right into what's going to happen next. Like, the amazement word isn't there, is what you're saying, right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So that amazement word isn't there, and that's a good catch.
Of that when he's on the boat.
Yeah.
It does make me think, though, of all the different times in church, growing up all the way through now, of when you connect church with feeding people.
Yeah.
And how, and then the Lord's Supper is, it kind of all.
Yeah, no, that's good. So let's do through the end of the chapter now. I think you guys will think this is cool. We've been setting this up the whole time. All right, verse 45.
Immediately, he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now, when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now, about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them.
Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid.
Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased. And they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled. For they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran through that whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered, into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well.
Okay. You can close that. All right. So he made the disciples get into a boat and they were going to sail across to the other side. Where did Jesus go?
Mountain to pray.
To the mountain to pray. Now, where were they? They were in the wilderness, weren't they? Mountains, wilderness, there's all kinds of, and this is kind of why I was connecting there at the beginning to Jesus being rejected by his own families and all that stuff. Is this a picture of Israel? And now we keep on getting these Exodus overtones now and all these things. Bad leadership from kings, which is definitely Israel's story. Israel rejecting the prophets and them having to wipe their feet off and all that stuff. You're seeing this. This is definitely a story about Jesus and his disciples, but it's also a story about Israel. And this is all happening again type of thing. And so he goes up to the mountain, and then the big storm comes up and they're straining at the oars. And he walks and then you have the weirdest phrase in all of the Bible, I think. Let's see here. Let's see. It says now about, this was 48. It's in the middle of it now, about the fourth watch of the night. He came to them walking on the sea and would have passed by them. Like it's the whole sense of it is like, in order to pass them, like it's like, hey fellas, and walk past them. Like it's such a weird statement. Like it's like Jesus is going to meet him on the other side or something like that, and just like wave at him as he's walking past. It's weird Jesus. It's weird. Mark has a lot of weird Jesus, and so until he walks in the sea, and then they immediately freak out. They think it's a ghost for obvious reason, and he's like, don't be afraid. It's just me. And he got in the boat and the wind ceased. And there are key phrases here. Okay. You have the amazed words. Yeah. Suddenly they're all amazed. Like words of the resurrection, to quote a sermon here recently. Words of the resurrection, words of the women leaving the empty tomb, right? Suddenly they were amazed, right? And they've seen everything here. Now, this is the stuff that makes me sit up. All right. So they were amazed themselves beyond measure. Then verse 25, for they had not understood about the loaves because their hearts were hardened. Mm-hmm. What do you hear there? What's
God giving manna?
Pharaoh. Yeah.
Pharaoh.
Manna and Pharaoh. Like mm-hmm. That's like they didn't see what was right in front of them. Like, and I got to be honest with you, like for years and years, I hadn't really seen this, but like when you start connecting the dots, you start going, oh man, like sheep without a shepherd, the story about Herod being a terrible king and all these things, like suddenly they had not understood any of this. They didn't understand what happened with the loaves. They thought it was probably just a neat trick. Because their hearts were like Herod, or hearts were like Pharaoh's, and because remember, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and it makes a big deep. It's interesting that it uses that language, mm-hmm. Like their hearts were hard. Their hearts were hard, and I think that's giving us a clue to what the disciples are about. That they were tired. That they want the power of Herod. They want the power of Herod. That their hearts were hard. They can't see all this because they're just enamored with the power and people following and all this stuff. And I think that phrasing causes us to be arrested as well. It's like, do I want that same? Do I want the political power? Do I want everyone to know how correct I am? Like that's do I want the followers? Do I want all of that? And because of that, am I not able to see what God is doing? Do I not have vision to see the loaves? Do I not have the vision to see what God is doing in the small things and the little places, even though it may be staring at me right in the face? And that's quite the revelation. That's quite the revelation that I had when I read this. I was like, oh my gosh, this story, because I always read that story about Herod by itself. I always read that feeding of the 5,000 by itself. And I always read the story about Jesus walking on the water by itself. But it's a story that's connected through all these things, that it's telling us that these people were sheep without a shepherd, and that true satisfaction comes from the way John puts it, through the living water, and that loaves being filled. And that's the very next little bit here. So they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. Now, remember, that's a Gentile land, or that's the land where the dude with all the demons came out, right? Yeah. They didn't like him. They came on the boat, and the people recognized him, and they ran surrounding region, and they began to carry out the beds of all those that were sick. And they entered the villages and the country and all that stuff. So we begin this chapter with the story of his own people, Israel, is rejecting him. And he sends out the disciples like the prophets before him, right? But the kings and the leadership are feckless. They're only interested for themselves. And even in some cases, the prophets are like that too. But the loaves are there. And we see that Jesus goes into the Gentile regions now. And they are opened up with open arms. The outsiders, the dirty, the nasty are the ones that are over there. It's like a little microcosm. It's like a little microcosm of the faith. And it's beautiful storytelling because you can read all of these stories by themselves and get stuff out of it. But when you allow it to kind of come together, you kind of see the mustard seeds working together to see what's happening. So yeah. So that's kind of what we had for today. We kept it tidy in one chapter today. And it kind of continues on. So that's that chapter that we called on the sermon, that was political power. So then we have religious power after that.